What's up, everybody? Brian here. Thank you so much for joining me on this inaugural podcast. This has been something I've been dying to do for years, and I really felt like we could use it because so many times on podcasts, we get unbelievable guests on, and maybe they'll talk about their approximate net worth or maybe what made them their money, but we don't really know. Like, what assets do they hold? Like, did they invest in yesterday? That's what's going to help you guys. And I know that's what would help me. And so how can I have my guests on and ask them to be vulnerable if I myself haven't put myself through the ringer? So I'm going to be interviewing myself today, and I'm going to be very vulnerable with you guys. And even though some of these numbers I'll be going over, I'm not necessarily proud of, or they're where I want them to be, I want you guys to see exactly what I'm made up of, what I'm investing in, and what has allowed me to get to where I'm at today, and what do I plan on investing in to get me to where I want to go. Now, before we get into the actual details, I think that everybody needs to understand that in any entrepreneur's life, there's that moment, that switch that turns on where they decide, hey, you know what? I'm not just gonna have hope as being my strategy. I'm not just gonna work that 9-to-5 job and say, you know what, maybe I'm gonna get lucky, maybe I'm gonna get that promotion, and you know what, hopefully I'll be able to retire someday and live how I want to live. Well, tomorrow's obviously not guaranteed, and so we gotta do something about it. And so I'll never forget what happened to me, and everybody has their own story, but mine came from something that actually made the news. And what that was is I was working as a loan officer. This is back in 2009. And I had been doing pretty well. I was in my late 20s at the time, and I had been setting some money aside and was able to save up a couple $100,000. And like so many people, I was living in Newport Beach at the time. I saw the fancy cars, the fancy houses, and I heard about an investing strategy from my friend's dad. And basically at the time, he told me he could get me about 25, 30% on my money annualized. He'd been doing it for a ton of his clients, and that he would let me in just being his son's friend. And mind you, at the time, he had a $15 million house in Newport Coast, Ferrari, everything. So I ended up giving him pretty much my entire life savings. Gave him a couple $100,000, maybe had 20 grand left in my savings account at the time. And first, it started going pretty well. And I was starting to get the checks in. I even got a little lazy. I was kind of playing golf, which I don't do anymore, during the day. I was working out during the middle of the day because I had like an extra 15 grand a month that was coming in. And what ended up happening was I got a call from an investigator about 8 months after I'd given him the money. And the investigator was actually from the FBI. And it turns out that this gentleman, which I'll say his name because I don't feel bad for him, John DeMar and Peter Kopp, what they were doing is they were running a massive Ponzi scheme and ended up embezzling somewhere around $40 or $50 million from people in Southern California. And basically, they were letting me know that I lost everything. Everything was gone. There wasn't even one chance I was likely going to even get any of the money back. They can't even find the money, and both the guys are on the run right now. And I remember sitting there in my chair just being like, God, how did this happen? Here I was, 27 years old, worked, to save this money, and what was I going to do? It was everything to me. And I made a decision at that moment in time of two things. One, I would never, ever invest in something that I was not in control of. I wasn't going to trust people because this was my good friend's dad that took advantage of me. And the second thing I was going to do is I was never going to rely on my income from my job to be the fuel that would allow me to grow my wealth someday. Because I had gotten a little taste of what it was like to have passive income coming in. And I was about 27, 28 years old, and it changed everything for me. That was really the entrepreneurial bug. I had only ever experienced the fruits of my labor, not the fruits of making a wise investment and just getting that mailbox money. And I loved it. It was a drug, and I was addicted to it. And that's what I want to be teaching you guys. I want to expose you to all the different ways that some of the wealthiest people in the country are making passive income and what they actually invested in and how much to put them in the position that they're in today. And so there's no better way than to transition into the big question. And that is not only what my net worth is, but how do you calculate your net worth, right? So let's start there. So the calculation of net worth is pretty simple. We take somebody's assets, we add them all up, what their house is worth, what their cars are worth, what their businesses are worth, every asset, their stock portfolio, all of those, and we add it up into one column. And then what we do is we add up all the debts they have. Maybe the car loan they have, maybe the mortgage loan they have, if they have loans against their business, credit card debt, whatever that may be. And then what we do is we simply take all the assets and we subtract all the debts, and what's left over is known as your net worth, right? And now people have what's called liquid net worth and illiquid net worth. Example of liquid net worth means, think of liquid as how quickly I can turn something into cash. So something that's very liquid would be like Apple stock or maybe a savings account. Something that's not quite as liquid would be, for an example, like the equity I have in my companies, right? It would take me a little bit of time to find a buyer to be able to do that. And so when you hear me use those terms, that's what that means. Is it liquid or is it illiquid? It doesn't mean it's a bad asset if it's illiquid, but not everything is liquid. And so my net worth really started to grow quite a bit really over the last 3 or 4 years. If I go back, 5 years ago, let's just call it to 2019, I was really probably only worth maybe $2 million at that time. And as it sits today, I'll get ready to be 42 years old in a month. My net worth is sitting right around $20 million. And it's not where I want it to be, but that is quite a bit of growth in, a very recent amount of time. And now I feel like a lot of people, when they say what their net worth is, it begs to ask the question of, well, what is that made up of? Is that one company that is worth $19 million? Well, dude, you're living a pretty crazy lifestyle if all of your technical net worth is tied up into something that you can't turn into liquid cash anytime soon, right? So the breakdown of my net worth looks something like this. So I own several companies, and my energy company, which is Soar Energy, which is solar and an energy tech company, that's probably my biggest asset. And the only reason I have a general idea of what my equity in that is worth is because we recently had an event where we did a valuation and we got a capital raise. And so my kind of equity within that company is somewhere conservatively around $8 million. Then the second biggest holding that I have, which is, for some of you guys that follow me on social, probably should be no surprise here, is my crypto portfolio. My crypto portfolio right now, and it'll be likely a lot more, hopefully in the next 8 or 9 months as we go through this bull run, is sitting somewhere in the neighborhood of around $6 million today. And that's made up of a bunch of different projects, which, if you follow me on social, you guys can download a copy of my crypto portfolio, which will show you all that for some more information. But the third biggest thing would then be my real estate portfolio. My real estate assets, I own several properties, some Airbnb properties out in Nashville, my primary home here in Scottsdale, and my real estate holdings are worth about $4 to $5 million is what they're worth. Now remember, that's the worth after I subtract out the mortgages I have on them. Then my mortgage company and a couple other companies I have, that's another couple $1 million there for you. And then I also keep cash, investments, and stocks. That's about, roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1 million there. And then have my personal assets, things like free and clear cars that I own, watches, jewelry, art, gold, silver, different things I, keep in safety deposit boxes and all of that. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of around $1 million too. So when you add all that up, you get roughly to that number of about $20 million. And so, like you can see, is everybody's strategy on how their net worth is built is very different. And you can see that my net worth, because I invested a lot of my cash into building out businesses, for an example, like our energy company, which has a couple patents pending, that's going to be very, very valuable someday. And it was a very strong return on my investment, as I maybe only have, $1 million into that, and look at it in 18 months, that, is easily at an 8x multiple, versus if I were to put that into a stock, I likely wouldn't get that same return. And so this is where being an entrepreneur can really have an upside. But mind you, on the downside is there's times where I had almost a negative net worth from owning businesses because I was trying to grow them and scale them. And so there's where a lot of times you'll see people with their net worth. It could be a really high number, but that number is all baked into their company. Now, the next thing is I want to always be very transparent with somebody. I get asked this, by kids sometimes or just followers of mine, like, hey man, what's the most amount of money you've ever made in a single year? And I'm an open book, and that's why I want my guests to kind of have the same, vulnerability with you guys. So in the year of 2021, between my income from my mortgage company, as well as some of my investments, mainly coming from the investments I was doing in crypto trading, I ended up making about $8 million that year, but I didn't keep all $8 million. What I actually took home, meaning cashed out of crypto and mortgage income and all of that, was somewhere in the neighborhood of just shy under $5 million in a year. And so that's been my biggest year. Now, obviously, taxes eat a big portion of that, and that was my best year I had on record. And it's definitely will not be the best I'll have in my life, that's for sure. Now, when we look at these assets and we look at the value of them, you'll probably notice that my three most valuable assets that I have is, number one, my Soar Energy, my solar and energy tech company I have, is my most valuable asset. And then followed up, for most people outside of their business, it'd probably be their real estate. But for me personally, it's crypto. Now, it was never designed to be that way, but I was a very early adopter of cryptocurrency, and I got in pretty early and pretty heavily when I exited a cannabis company and got about $1 million I invested into crypto with that. And that was timed perfectly kind of in 2020. And that really grew. I mean, that portfolio got to one time almost $8 million. And even now through the bear market, it was still worth several million. And so that wasn't my desire to basically have this be the second largest contributor to my net worth, but it was a very good investment. And that is what allowed that to be kind of my second most valuable asset in my portfolio. And then number three is obviously my real estate, which primarily is made up of two big properties I own that each have well over $1 million of equity in those. And so that's my strategy. Now, everybody has a different strategy based on what they're drawn to investing in, right? So if I went and bring on a lot of my guests, I guarantee you they're not going to have the same exposure to crypto, but you know what? Maybe it'll be, a big contributor to gold. And what I want you guys to see is that there's no right answer. There's multiple ways to create wealth, but you guys are going to find a lot of commonalities in some of the investing strategies and the mindset. And that's really what I want you guys to see, so that you guys can say, hey, you know what? I really align with this strategy. I really kind of want to follow this pattern. And now you actually have the curtain pulled back to see what that kind of secret formula is. Now, before you guys all start thinking to yourselves, man, dude, this guy, whatever he touches must just turn to gold. That could not be further from the truth. And that's why every guest, I'm going to make them answer this question. It's my favorite question that I'm going to bring up. And that is, what is the worst investment you've ever made? Because we don't talk about this. And I think it can really help you guys avoid some of the pitfalls that even the smartest investors have made. And so for me personally, there's two that obviously really stand out. One, I told you, is I lost almost $400,000 in that Ponzi scheme. But outside of that, in 2020, I actually made an investment for about $650,000 into a cannabis company. And this was a company that was going to be making oil out of cannabis that you could be putting into vape pens and all those types of things. And basically, like so many businesses, it just failed. They didn't get the licensing they needed. There was a plethora of issues that really came about. But I ended up losing every single bit of my investment. And not only that, one of my really close friends and next door neighbors, he invested $1 million on it because I introduced him to the investment, and he ended up losing that as well. So, that's one thing you guys got to be careful for is, everyone always asks what you're investing in, but you need to make sure that you're very clear with the people you're telling your investments about, of saying like, hey, here's how long I've been in it. Here's what I've seen so far. Here's the risks, and that's something I really learned is, I kind of jumped in and they saw how excited I were and they jumped right in. And then we ended up both really getting our clocks cleaned. And so even though you get your clock cleaned every now and again for making a bad investment, and you definitely want to have risks, certain things in place to prevent these kind of stop losses, to kind of prevent the bleeding, which is doing your own research a lot of times. But sometimes when you take a chance, you really hit a winner, and you have to kind of get up to bat again, take that swing, and have that risk appetite. And so I ended up really taking two big swings. One of them was an initial cannabis investment, which did very, very well. But what that actually did was I was able to take some of the winnings or some of the payout from that, and I invested that, and I started buying Ethereum. And I was buying Ethereum in 2019, and I was buying Ethereum at around about $200. And so I ended up buying somewhere in the neighborhood of around $100,000 of Ethereum, and which at the time, at it only being about $200, $300, that ended up doing about a 30x. And so that investment of just $100,000 ended up turning into about $2.5 million in 18 months. Now, I hope I get another one of those this crypto cycle, but that really is what got me super excited and obsessed with that crypto space. And that was by far my best investment I've ever made in my life. And I made that investment in 2019 and took a lot of those winnings out in 2021, luckily right before the crypto market reset, which it does. Usually you see that 4-year history based on those cryptocurrency cycles. So it's very, very important. Don't go out there and buy a bunch of Ethereum right now if you don't pay attention to those cycles. So there's a little bit of methodology that needs to go in behind that. Now, I know what you guys are thinking to yourself. Brian, those sound like great investments, but I don't know if all those are gonna work now. What is an investment that I can make right now? And so this was an actionable insight that was so crucial. And one of the big keystones in me actually wanting to start this podcast was bringing you inside the world of what people are investing in right now that have a proven track record of being successful. So the most recent investments I personally just made, and I actually made both of them this week, was buying Coinbase stock. And the reason why I bought Coinbase stock is because one, I knew they were gonna have a blowout earnings report, which they did, but it's not too late. Coinbase is a platform. It's the exchange of Americans that want to start trading in cryptocurrency. And they generate fees like any exchange. For every time you buy or sell, they get a percentage of it. And because we've now seen mass adoption in cryptocurrency, and we haven't really started to see the bull run happen, it's still likely several months away, I knew that just like the cyclical nature of cryptocurrency, this is a stock that also will likely have this major upswing with the market. So I did buy some shares of Coinbase. The other investment I just made was I purchased an AI cryptocurrency stock called 0x0. And why I purchased this was it is actually using AI that it goes ahead and audits a cryptocurrency product or program, and it tells them before they actually deploy this contract where their weaknesses are. Because one of the things that scares a lot of people about cryptocurrency are these hacks that you hear, right? Where this exchange gets hacked, or maybe this project gets hacked by some hacker. And then what they know is, oh my gosh, they hacked us, let's go in and fix it. Well, what 0x0 does is it actually is machine learning and AI that will find these vulnerabilities and actually tell the coders and programmers where these vulnerabilities lie so that they can address them prior to that smart contract getting deployed. And this is a newer project, it's a riskier project, but I really love the use case, and I love that it ties into both AI and cryptocurrency. And so those are the two most recent investments I made. Now, I know most people's issue isn't coming up with a couple $1,000s to invest. It's what do they do with it? This money is, they got one shot. They gotta make this work. They don't have the opportunity of taking $5,000 and investing in something and it going to zero. So they have this mindset of like, I want to not invest in something super crazy risky, but I also kind of want the returns that come along with investing in something risky. And so that's what you really need to first identify with yourself is, hey, this money that I'm investing, if I was told there is a 50% chance that it goes up 3x in a year, and then there's a 50% chance that I lose everything, would I make that investment? And so that is my personal mindset that I go into things with, because I am willing to take that risk with a certain percentage of my capital. Now, I wouldn't do it with everything. So when you're evaluating on how to invest, you need to answer and ask yourself that question and be honest with yourself. And so if I had $100,000 right now, and that $100,000 was all the money that I had, what investment would I make? And the reason why I preface it that way is because I am going to be a little bit less risk tolerant in this case if it's the only money I got. And so if I was going to take $100,000 and I could buy just 2 or 3 things with that, what would I buy? So no surprise on the first one. The first one is going to be in the safe asset of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to continue to go up. We're in that cyclical nature. We just came out of a halving. Now, my personal target on Bitcoin is somewhere between 95 and 125,000 kind of by the spring or early spring, maybe February, March of next year. So I would take probably about 50% of that investment and I'd put it into a safe cryptocurrency project like Bitcoin, where I can probably plan on making a 50 to 70% return over the next 9 to 12 months. The second thing I would do was I would actually buy gold. And why I would buy gold right now, and I would use probably 25% of that $100,000, 25 grand to buy gold, is because we are starting to see inflation tick up. And we are also starting at the same time to see the economy slow down. This is known as stagflation when it's combined with actually an increase in the unemployment rate. And during stagflation climates or an inflationary climate, we see hard assets do really well. And we just saw in the jobs report that came out from April, we saw the growth in jobs is really down. We saw in the GDP report that came out for the first quarter of the year, dude, economy's not looking so good. It didn't grow by nearly as much as what we thought it would grow by. And on top of that, inflation is beginning to tick back up. And so when we look at those 3 items and we see how gold has historically done in either a high inflation or a high stagflation environment, it's produced some of their best returns. And gold is due for a run since it's up until the last year has been pretty stagnant for the last decade. And in the last 25%, what I would do is I would actually take that and I would invest it in AI stocks. Now, I know what you guys are thinking, like AI's already had its run, but my belief is for a long-term horizon, viewing AI from either whether that's something like a NVIDIA play or an AMD play or a number of different other stocks, I would look at investing the extra money in a AI ETF. ETF stands for an electronically traded fund. It's a group of stocks that you can buy under a single stock ticker that will give you exposure. So this is a great way to play it because if, say, it holds a basket of 20 stocks in that ETF and 5 of those stocks don't do well, and 10 of the stocks do okay and 5 of the stocks just absolutely crank, I have a really good risk-adjusted return. And so 100 grand, 50 grand in Bitcoin, 25 grand in gold, and 25 grand in AI stocks that ideally through an ETF to kind of mitigate investing in any one single stock. Now, guys, I just want to remind you, this is just a little taste of what you guys are going to be getting on the show. Now, I have some unbelievable guests, and I didn't actually want to start this podcast until I got to the point where I could get the guests on the show that I really wanted to get on this show, and then ask them to be vulnerable with their finances in a way that they've never been on any podcast, any show, anything they've ever done before. And the lineup is insane. You guys are going to be shocked at some of the net worth that these guys have and how open they're going to be with you, because at their heart, they were where you are right now and they understand that. And they identify with you and they want to give you that knowledge. They have that abundance mindset. And I hope you guys, by just getting a little taste of what you're going to expect on the show, really gives you that transparency that you all are craving and you deserve. And I am so excited. I can't even tell you how excited I am to be sharing the wealth of knowledge that you guys are going to receive that is going to impact your lives. I have had the pleasure of getting hundreds of DMs from my followers on my social media accounts about how much money they've made on an investment that they've seen that I've recommended. And that's just a taste of it. That just fuels me to bring the very best content, the very best guests, and make sure that they stay real with you guys. They don't hide anything and they tell you exactly where they've failed, what they've invested in, and not be afraid to take a chance and reveal what they're really doing regardless of the outcome. And with the track record these guys have, you guys are in for a treat. And so I cannot wait to see you guys next time. And I am so fired up about this season. So make sure you guys tune in to Dollars with Decker, and I'll see you guys next time.